Welcome to part 2 of the week 2 presentation. In part 1 I went over some failover clustering basics, and now in part 2 I'm going to introduce you to some of the key terms for this week, and then finally I'll introduce you to the week 2 assignment. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at some of our key terms for this week. I'm not going to mention all of the key terms here. Some of them have already been addressed, and others you will run into in your weekly reading assignment, but I do want to highlight some of the more important key terms. The first one you see here is active cluster. We've already talked about this one, but it's a cluster where all nodes are active, and if one or more nodes were to fail, then the other nodes would take on the additional workload in order to compensate for that failure. The next one you see here is active-passive cluster. We've talked a little bit about this one as well, but it's a cluster that includes both active and passive nodes, where the passive nodes are used only if an active node fails. And the next term you see here, authoritative restore. This restores a cluster from a previous backup that is marked as the current and authoritative configuration. Typically this is done when an administrator wants to undo a configuration mistake. Next, cluster resource. According to Microsoft, a cluster resource is any physical or logical component that has the following characteristics. It can be brought online and taken offline. It can be managed in a server cluster, or can be hosted or owned by only one node at a time. The last term you see here on this slide, cluster storage, this is a disk file system that is shared between nodes in a cluster. Here on this slide you see the other key terms I'd like to go over with you. First, there's the failover cluster, and as we've mentioned before, that's a group of independent servers or nodes that work together in order to increase the availability and the scalability of applications and services. These are often referred to as clustered roles. The next key term, non-authoritative restore. This type of restore is typically used when a single node is being restored. Once the node is fixed or replaced and then restarted, it will get the latest configuration from the other nodes in the cluster. Next, generic clustered role. This is for providing high availability for an application or service that was not specifically designed to operate within a cluster. Next term, general use file server. This is an active-passive cluster made up of file servers that provide a centralized file storage solution for users or server applications. And the final key term here that I would like to discuss is the scale-out file server. This is an active-active failover cluster in which all nodes are active and all nodes contain all of the shared files. Scale-out file servers support SMB, but not NFS or DFS. Okay, so finally, let's take a few minutes to go over the assignment for this week. So first of all, let me navigate to the assignment within Blackboard. Okay, here we go. Here's our week 2 assignment. Okay, and as you can see here, the assignment starts out with a list of the assignment objectives. These, of course, are the weekly learning objectives that are addressed in the Week 2 assignment. Now, since we've already gone over all the weekly objectives, I won't go over them again, but notice that all 5 of the weekly learning objectives are addressed in the Week 2 assignment. Okay, next in the assignment, you see the purpose for this assignment, followed by the guidelines. Okay, the purpose for this assignment is for you to learn how to configure and manage failover clustering in Windows Server 2012. Next, the guidelines are the same guidelines that are in all of the weekly assignments. Okay, just make sure that you follow each of these objectives, or each of these guidelines rather, as you are completing the Week 2 assignment. Next are the assigned labs. These labs will be completed within the MOAC online lab environment. You can find information about accessing the MOAC labs online in the NT302 course syllabus. As we continue to look at the Week 2 assignment, notice that it is estimated that it will take you about 2 hours and 35 minutes in order to complete all of the assigned labs. As you can see, your first lab for Week 2 is MOAC 7412 Lab 2. In this lab, you will be learning how to configure failover clustering, which includes configuring the iSCSI client, installing the failover clustering feature, creating a failover cluster, and finally, configuring the quorum. Okay, the other lab that you have to complete as part of the Week 2 assignment is MOAC 7412 Lab 3. Which is where you will perform some tasks related to managing a failover cluster. In this lab, you will be deploying the general use file server role, deploying a scale-out file server, configuring failover and preference settings, managing a cluster, and for the last part of this lab, you will actually destroy a cluster. Okay, so I've already logged into the MOAC Labs online, so let me bring that up and I'll show you where the labs are located for this week. Okay, after you've logged in, you should see a list of the labs here, just like what you're seeing in this presentation. Okay, and here is Lab 2. Okay, and then over here is Lab 3. When you are ready to begin the labs, be sure to download the manual. Then you can just click on the lab to start it. Let's take just a minute to look at Lab 2. It'll take just a few seconds here for the lab to load. And as you can see, it's just about up. There we go. Okay, now that Lab 2 is loaded, the first thing that you should notice is that on the right hand side you have access to all of the devices that you will need for this lab, as well as the lab manual. I'm going to go ahead and open up the lab manual. Okay, give me just a second here to resize it so that you can see it here in this presentation. Okay, so when working on the labs, if you have a monitor that is large enough, I suggest that you split the screen with the lab manual on one side and the actual lab itself on the other side. Doing this should make completing the lab much easier for you. Now, while I'm recording this presentation, I'll not be able to do this, but again, that is my suggestion for you. It'll save you some time. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the lab manual. Keep in mind the lab manual is designed to assist in a real lab environment in addition to the virtual lab environment that we are using in this course. Okay, first of all, here you see the different exercises that are included in this lab. Notice that your assignment for week 2 does not include the last 2 exercises. However, if you have the time to complete them, it would be beneficial to you. Okay, next you see a table that lists all of the servers that we will be using in this lab. You can see here that the lab uses 4 different servers. One server is set up as a domain controller, and the others are just plain servers, one of which we'll use for file storage. Next, you see a section titled Working with Lab Worksheets. This section just tells you what you need to know in order to successfully complete the labs. Keep in mind that your assignment instructions may require you to get additional screenshots above and beyond what you are asked to get within the lab manual instructions. Okay, next, the lab manual explains what it is that you should be capable of doing after completing this lab. As you can see here, after completing Lab 2, you should be comfortable completing the following: installing and configuring a failover cluster, and configuring a quorum. These last 2 skills here, implementing cluster aware updating and upgrading a cluster, those are associated with the last 2 exercises that have not been assigned to you. But again, if you have time to complete those, that would be great. Okay, finally what you see next here is the first exercise, exercise 2.1. As you are completing this and other exercises, be sure that you follow the steps closely and follow them in order. As you can see here, this first exercise has a total of 35 steps. At this point, I will go ahead and wrap up this presentation. If you have any questions about the Week 2 assignment, be sure to contact your instructor. This concludes Part 2 of this Week 2 presentation.